breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Have a great Saturday night with me, Leo Curse, on the Saturday Night Showdown. It's a crazy world out there, so come and make fun of it with me, my panel of comedians, and a couple of people who actually know what they're talking about. The Saturday Night Showdown is your front row ticket to the clown show every Saturday, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa!
Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox,
That's right, we want to hear from you,
GB News.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Wake up to the headlines with headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
It's 9 o'clock on television, on radio and online. In the United Kingdom and across the world, this is Mark Dolan Tonight. In my big opinion, a top cellist says Rule Britannia should be axed from last night at the Proms. When did it become a bad thing to love your country? Tomorrow sees the 100-year anniversary of the first Labour government. And in tonight's Mark Meets, I'll be joined by the author of a brand new book all about a century of socialism in Britain and that very first post-war Labour administration. In the big story, is net zero to blame for the Port Talbot steelworks closures? We'll hear from both sides on that one, and I'm looking forward to this. He's the man of the moment in my take at 10. Threatening attacks on the biggest BBC star are a disgrace. But be clear, Gary Lineker is no victim. That's right, I'll be dealing with Gary Lineker in no uncertain terms at 10. You won't want to miss it. Plus, as he stands down as leader of UKIP, Neil Hamilton will reflect on 60 years in politics and the future of the party and British conservatism. And there's been a twist in the US presidential election race. We'll bring you more of that as well. So 2 hours of big opinion, big debate and big entertainment. Lineker at 10, and in 2 minutes' time, Rule Britannia. I may even sing, but first, the very musical Tamsin Roberts.
Mark, thanks very much, and good evening from the GB Newsroom. It's 1 minute past 9. The Met Office says 90 miles per hour winds have hit parts of Wales this evening as Storm Isha hits Britain. Forecasters say there's a danger to life in some areas, warning of falling trees, power cuts and possible flooding. A so-called tornado watch zone has been issued for Northern Ireland, as well as parts of Scotland and Northern England. Speed restrictions are in place across Network Rail, and ScotRail expects all services to be suspended until tomorrow morning. Flights have also been cancelled across the country amid the bad weather. Ron DeSantis has dropped out of the US presidential race and has endorsed Donald Trump. His surprise video announcement comes ahead of this week's New Hampshire Republican primary, where Mr. DeSantis was polling in the single digits. His departure leaves Nikki Haley as Mr. Trump's only significant rival. The Duchess of York has been diagnosed with skin cancer just months after being treated for breast cancer. The diagnosis comes after she had several moles removed, with one of those identified as being cancerous. A spokesperson for Sarah, Duchess of York, confirmed she has been diagnosed with malignant melanoma. She's said to be undergoing further investigations to ensure it's been caught early. The Duchess is said to be in good spirits, despite the fact another cancer diagnosis so soon after the last one has been what she called distressing. Detectives investigating the deaths of 4 people in Norwich on Friday say 2 adults died of stab wounds. The man and woman, along with 2 young children, were found dead in a house in Cossey. Post-mortem examinations for the 2 girls will be carried out on Wednesday. Norfolk Police has referred itself to the independent watchdog after failing to respond to a 999 call made from the home where the bodies were found. A 17-year-old boy who was stabbed to death in Birmingham city centre on Saturday has been named by police. West Midlands Police say officers were called to Victoria Square after Mohammed Hassam Ali was found seriously injured. He was rushed to hospital but later died. Anyone who may have taken pictures in the area around the river statue on Saturday afternoon is being urged to contact police. The Home Office will use private boats at a cost of £36 million a year to patrol the Channel for migrant crossings. The government's been forced to pay for private vessels due to delays in a planned upgrade of the Border Force fleet. The contract for charter of vessels to support small boat crossings in Dover is due to run from April until March next year. This is GB News across the UK on TV, in your car on digital radio and on your smart speaker by saying play GB News. Now it's back to Mark.
A delight to have Tamsin Roberts with us on a Sunday night. She returns in an hour's time. Welcome to a busy Mark Dolan tonight. In my big opinion, a top cellist says Rule Britannia should be axed from last night at the Proms. When did loving your country become a problem? In the big story, is net zero to blame for the Port Talbot Steelworks closures? We'll hear from both sides on that one. And tomorrow sees the 100-year anniversary of the first Labour government. My Mark Meets guest is the author of a brand new book all about a century of Labour in power. In my take at 10, threatening attacks on the BBC's biggest star are a disgrace. But be clear, Gary Lineker is no victim. I'll be dealing with the Match of the Day star in no uncertain terms at 10. Now, in a major new headache for Rishi Sunak, the Sun on Sunday newspaper report that a handful of Tory MPs are in secret defection talks with Reform UK. I'll get reaction from one of Reform's most high-profile supporters, the fearless, the unapologetic Anne Widdecombe. Plus, as calls grow for a ban on prayers in schools, is it time to keep religion out of the classroom? We've got tomorrow's front pages at 10:30 sharp with 3 top pundits who haven't been told what to say and who don't follow the script. Tonight, Lisa Mackenzie, Lord Ranger and Neil Hamilton. Speaking of the devil, as he stands down as leader of UKIP, Neil Hamilton will reflect on 60 years in politics and the future of both UKIP and British conservatism. And there's been a twist in the US presidential election race. We'll deal with all of that shortly. Plus, the most important part of the show, your emails. They come straight to my laptop, mark@gbnews.com. Now, this show has a golden rule. We don't do boring, not on my watch. I just won't have it. A big 2 hours to come. Lineker at 10, but first, my big opinion. Remember the good old days when loving your country was a good thing? The highly talented cellist who performed at the wedding of the Duke and Duchess of Sussex has said the song Rule Britannia should be axed from last night at the Proms. Sheku Kane-Mason, who is a huge talent and captured the world's attention at the age of just 19 when performing at Harry and Meghan's nuptials, said that some people don't realise how uncomfortable a song like that can make a lot of people feel. Now, there was a bit of controversy around this anthem in 2020 when the BBC had a plan to perform the song without words. Now, surely the words are the important bit. Following an outcry, they changed course. This, of course, is the same BBC who wanted to get rid of Land of Hope and Glory from the Proms. Now, I'm a big fan of this cellist, and he's absolutely entitled to his view. But it strikes me as a worrying trend that many people dislike, are ashamed of, or are even embarrassed by their own country. And let me tell you, that's not normal. Every nation on earth is patriotic. Every nation waves the flag, and every nation sings its anthems and national songs with pride. And that's the way it should be, because a nation is a community and a family brought together on these occasions by music, by words, and by symbolism. Look at America. The American flag adorns every school in the country. Americans sing the Star-Spangled Banner anthem. They pledge allegiance to the Union more often than they eat hamburgers. America is a successful country because of a strong sense of nationhood. And patriotism is the norm around the world. Across Europe, Africa, Asia and beyond, it is what binds people together. Patriotism is a positive force. And it's one of coming together, of unity, of shared values, a shared history, shared aspirations, shared hope, shared stories. So when people criticise songs like Rule Britannia, God Save the King and Land of Hope and Glory, in my view, they wrongly conflate the lyrics with nationalism, which is a negative, destructive force, which says that we are great and the rest of the world is bad. Now, many are uncomfortable with the words Rule Britannia, Britannia Rule the Waves, as though it somehow champions imperialism or even colonialism. Well, first of all, Britain wasn't the only empire, but ours is the only one which has a positive legacy. The Commonwealth, in which the former nations that we once ruled remain close diplomatic, military and economic allies. No other so-called empire has achieved this. Rule Britannia also assumed extra significance in 1945 at the conclusion of World War II, when it was played at the ceremonial surrender of the Japanese Imperial Army in Singapore. And I think we can agree defeating the cruel and ruthless Japanese forces is something to be proud of. Rule Britannia is mainly a celebration of our magnificent Royal Navy, which has led Britain to so much military success, including playing its part in the defeat of Adolf Hitler and Nazism. I don't know about you, but I'm quite happy to sing a song that celebrates that. Some are anxious that the tune somehow glorifies slavery. Now, slavery is the greatest evil in history, perpetuated for centuries, I might add. But there is no mention of it in the song other than "we shall not be slaves." Who could argue with that? And let's not forget, it was the British and the Royal Navy in particular who expensively, at a huge cost of blood and treasure, dismantled the slave trade. It took 5 decades, but we achieved it. Now, the woke left, who have such influence on our public institutions, always seek division, chopping people up into different political identity groups so that we can all fight each other. Which is why illiberal progressives detest patriotism so much. Why? Because it brings people of all races, colours and creeds together. I'm an example of that. Born to Irish immigrant parents, I will take any opportunity to sing joyous songs about the United Kingdom. This country needs to come together, and songs like Rule Britannia are the answer, not the problem. Britain is now a global beacon of diversity, the most successful integrated society in the world. But the glue which binds us is our tradition, our history and our values. And our future depends on everyone being able to sing to the same tune. So perhaps I could finish with a couple of lyrics from Rule Britannia, and don't worry, I won't sing. Here it goes. When Britain first, at heaven's command, arose from out the azure main. This was the charter of the land, and guardian angels sung this strain. Rule Britannia, rule the waves. Britons never will be slaves. The nations not so blessed as thee must in their turns to tyrants fall, while thou shalt flourish great and free, the dread and envy of them all. Rule Britannia, rule the waves. Last one. Britons never will be slaves. Still more majestic shalt thou rise, more dreadful from each foreign stroke, as the loud blast that tears the skies serves but to root thy native oak. I mean, that's some poetry, isn't it? Are you offended by Rule Britannia? Let me know if you are. You'll get a hearing on this programme, because Mark Dolan tonight is the home of diverse opinion. Mark at GBnews.com, reacting to my big opinion. I'm delighted to have author and broadcaster Lisa Mackenzie, Conservative peer and former advisor to Boris Johnson, Lord Ranger, and former minister and current leader of UKIP, Neil Hamilton. Lisa, let me start with you. Do you think that Rule Britannia is a bit old-fashioned? Is it time to give it the heave-ho?
I actually think it is, actually. I mean, I'd prefer, if we've got a choice between God Save Our Gracious King and Rule Britannia, I'd rather have Rule Britannia. But I think I'd rather have Jerusalem over both of them. I mean, I wouldn't sing this. It's not for me. I'm not offended by it. The cellist is from Nottingham, so, you know, I kind of know...
You're biased?
Pardon?
You're biased?
No, not really. I mean, not really. He's from Nottingham, but probably not the same part of Nottingham I'm from. You can say that. He's from, a very nice part of Nottingham.
Is that right? Is he a bit posh? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, they are as a family. There's quite a lot of them, and they're very musical and very, they are quite posh.
What is, out of interest, what is the name of the posh bit of Nottingham, then?
I can't really... Should I say where they live?
Of course. Is there an area within Nottingham?
Yes, there's two areas. There's the park, which is where the Nottingham Castle is, and then there's Mapley Park. They're very sort of expensive places, but literally across the road is one of the poorest places in the country. So, when I start thinking about Rule Britannia, I think about the divisions that we've got in our country, and particularly around wealth. And actually, when I think about the cellist and his family and where they live, and actually... across the road is a very poor part of Nottingham. I think there's bigger things to be offended by, actually.
That's interesting. Cool Veer, my parents are Irish. Lost my dad, sadly, at the end of last year, but they came to the UK in the late 50s, early 60s, made a life for themselves, started a family. I will take any opportunity to sing Rule Britannia or any of the other anthems. What's your view?
I'm like you, Mark. Look, my grandparents came here in the 60s, parents in the 70s and 80s. I'm actually hugely proud because I'm the first British turban-wearing Sikh to be in the House of Lords. I'm born and bred Briton. So it's about these shared values. You mentioned traditions, values. Do we share them, our history? I think one of the challenges we have is we're not taught this history well. We're not taught modern British history well. Therefore, where we've got cultures, and you said we're a beacon in the world around having multi-cultures living quite peacefully, actually, if you compare it to many, many other countries together. But we have to have these shared values, and therefore we have to understand these traditions and understand what Last Night of the Proms is, understand what Rule Britannia is about, because I think it's more about people understanding that than latching on to the potential misguided views of error-strewn views that this is about slavery and other things. So more accurate understanding of our history, a better understanding of the shared values of being British, as well as holding on to whichever culture your family and personal history comes from.
Most definitely. Look, I think it's about absorbing the culture of the country that you're part of, Neil Hamilton. I've got relatives and family in Austria, and I'm wearing the lederhosen. We need to embrace these things, because whether you're gay or straight, black or white, you're British, and these songs represent that, Neil.
Yeah, of course they do. You know, who couldn't be proud of a nation like Britain? When you think of the contribution that we have made to the world in so many different ways, this tiny island on the periphery of Western Europe, half out into the Atlantic Ocean, and yet, you know, regardless of what you think of the British Empire, the legacy which the British Empire has given to all sorts of countries in things like the rule of law, respect for democracy, representative government, the English language, which is a unifying feature in a country like India, for example, where there are hundreds of different languages. So you know, we have a lot to be proud of for our contribution in terms of the arts and sciences, technology. You know, we gave the world the Industrial Revolution. We created the modern world in many respects. And Rule Britannia actually is all about, as you rightly said in your introduction, is about freedom of our nation, which is maintained by the Royal Navy because we were an island and we had had very bad experiences of dictatorship under a standing army, under Cromwell, who of course existed only decades before Rule Britannia was written, and the Royal Navy defended us against invasion and therefore enabled us to retain our independence and our own way of life. And that's what it was all about, as in verse 2 of Rule Britannia, which you read out a moment ago. You know, the nations not so blessed as thee must in their turns to tyrants fall. Well, we didn't, because our Navy protected us because we did rule the waves.
Rule Britannia, Britannia, rule the waves. There you go, I did it, folks. I went there. Listen, coming up next in the big story, is net zero to blame for the Talbot Steelworks closures? Plus, we've been conducting a Mark Dolan Tonight People's Poll. We've been asking, should last night of the Proms axe Rule Britannia? The results are in. I shall reveal all next.
I'm Christopher Hope.
And I'm Gloria Di Piero, bringing you
PMQ's Live here on GB News. Every Wednesday, we'll bring you live coverage of Prime Minister's questions when Rishi Sunak and Sir Keir Starmer go head-to-head in the House of Commons.
We'll be asking our viewers and listeners to submit the questions that they would like to put to the Prime Minister, and we'll put that to our panel of top politicians in our Westminster studio.
That's PMQ's Live here on GB News, Britain's election channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel. Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan, Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks, the admission's free.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Well, a top cellist wants to axe rule Britannia. That's the topic of my big opinion. So many emails on this. How about David? Mark, this cellist should be thankful for all of the tuition he got to be able to play the cello as well as he can. Where did he get that? Great Britain. If he wants to bite the hand that feeds him, he can play his cello somewhere else, says David. Yvonne says, we love rule Britannia. Even when I sing it, Yvonne. How about this from John? Mark, we're going down a very dangerous path. We need to get the English history curriculum in schools back on track. I'm saddened by the loss of our heritage in so many ways. Sing it loud, sing it often, says John. Folks, thank you so much for that. Look, quickly, Les, who says, Mark, I'm a Falklands veteran and have been and always will continue to sing Rule Britannia since I was 6 years of age. Well, let me say, Les, first of all, well done for singing Rule Britannia. And secondly, can I thank you on behalf of my viewers and listeners for your service to this country. OK, folks, is it time for the poll, Greg? Shall we do that? We've conducted an exclusive Mark Dolan Tonight People's Poll. We've been asking, should last night of the Proms axe rule Britannia? The results are in, and it's overwhelming. 93.6% say no, and 6.4% say yes, get rid. Now, residents of the Welsh town of Talbot are still reeling from the news that Tata Steel are to close the blast furnaces at their iconic steelworks and replace them with an electric arc furnace, which produces less CO2 but requires fewer workers. Union bosses say Tata's plans are unacceptable and will be devastating for the town. So is this a step in the right direction as the government pursues its climate goals, or are ordinary working Brits being slaughtered at the altar of net zero? Let's get the views of top journalist and author of Not Zero, Ross Clark, whose latest article about this issue features in this week's Spectator. And I tell you what, it's a spicy bit of journalism. Also with me is the leader of the Climate Party, a brand new friend of the show. Great to have you back, Ed Gemmell. Gentlemen, welcome to the programme. What do you think about this, Ed? Bad news for ordinary working people. Net zero means no jobs.
Oh, I think it's terrible news. I'm, very depressed for those people, and I really, do feel for them. I think it's a total dereliction of duty. We should have gone harder, faster, and seen it coming. So we actually got the job done a lot earlier. And there's an exact example happening elsewhere in Europe at the moment that should be a lesson to us. In Sweden at the moment, a company called H2 Green Steel. It's building up to actually produce 95% decarbonised steel. And it's going to start operation in 2025. It's just taken in 1.6 billion euros of investment, so approximately the same amount as the government and Tata Steel are going to put into this new electric arc furnace, which is actually just a recycling facility after all for old steel. And this one in Sweden is going to produce 1,500 jobs on the spot, but nearly 10,000 jobs through all of its supply chains and everything else. Now, if we had actually taken that money that we have wasted now, and those 3,000 jobs are gone, we'd invested it early, we'd have really clean steel production and bigger in production. They're going to do 5 million tonnes in the end. That's more than the 3 million at the moment that's being done at Port Talbot. We'd be ahead and have more jobs.
Well, there you go, Ross Clark. Get with the programme, Grandpa. This is the future.
Well, I will agree with Ed on that, actually, that if you're going to invest, the government's going to invest in what it calls green steel. I mean, it should go for the genuine green option. I mean, I'm not quite as, bullish about it as Ed is, because, it is a demonstration plant where, there's a lot of problems to overcome before you can commercialise the technology of making steel without any coal, with using hydrogen rather than coking coal. But what we've got going to have at Port Talbot is as I said, it's a recycling plant. It's not an electric arc furnace only does half the job. Steel making's a two-part process. You have to extract the iron from the iron ore, and then you turn the iron into steel. Electric arc furnace can do the second half, it cannot do the first half. And what's going to happen as a result of this is that we're going to have a steelworks in South Wales and also one up in Scunthorpe, which is only capable of turning scrap steel into new steel, or will be reliant on pig iron imports from elsewhere in the country. And what we will be doing in the interim is we will be importing steel from China, most likely China, other countries. And to this particular move of closing down the blast furnaces and building an electric arc furnace in maybe a few years' time, is it will reduce British jobs, but it will increase global carbon emissions, because, you know, the steel we'll be importing will be from the other side of the world, so there's a carbon emissions involved there. And it's also using electricity in China, which is 70% generated by coal, rather than Welsh electricity is relatively clean compared with Chinese electricity. So looking at it from a global point of view, this is actually going to increase carbon emissions, yet the government will go round claiming it's a great success because we've taken out between 1 and 2% of UK carbon emissions.
OK. Well, there you go. There you go, Ed Gemmell. This move is going to be bad for the environment. Put that in your pipe and smoke it.
Well, I think it's very unusual, I think, when you find Ross and I actually agreeing on something. But the idea of importing the steel from China, of course, is absolutely ridiculous. But I mean, as I started when I was talking about, we should be going harder and faster, gripping. I mean, the Climate Party is the only party in the country with a proper industrial mission, and a mission to get us out of the doldrums we are in the UK. And that's to invest hard, invest fast, see the writing on the wall. And what the Swedes are doing is just what we should be doing to be at the top of the pile. And then we wouldn't have the problem that both Ross and I are agreeing on. Okay. And that's importing dirty steel from somewhere else.
Ed, when you become Prime Minister, and I do hope you'll stay in touch and respond to my WhatsApp messages, which departmental budget will it come out of, this push for net zero? Will it come out of the NHS? Will it come out of defence? Will it come out of schools or policing?
It's entirely the opposite, Mark. A lot of the investment will come straight out of the city and out of private investment. And what we have to do in the UK is set the right target that gives them the certainty that government's on the case. It knows what it's doing. We're going early enough so that we can actually see that it's really going to happen. I think the one thing that you are talking about, though, in terms of budgets is government procurement. If we set the right target, then government procurement goes in and it starts fueling and it starts driving the industry as it is. Look at one big thing we've got at the moment, whether you agree with it or not, HS2. Look at the amount of steel being sunk into that. The contracts with HS2 required that all of that steel needed to be decarbonised steel. Look how quickly the industry would change, and it wouldn't be public money that wasn't already being spent.
Ed Gemmell, where's the empathy, though? I've got people watching this show, listening to this show, who will have lost their job in Port Talbot, almost 3,000 people. What would you say to them about the push for net zero? Because I can't imagine they're warming to it right now.
I think you're blaming the push for net zero, whereas, and I do have empathy for them, Mark, not avoiding the question like I did last time I was on your show, but I do have empathy for them. But really what we've got to say is the thing is we should have gone harder and faster. We should have gripped it and got the new green steel manufacturing plants there in Port Talbot early. We should have already been working on it. And it's because people keep delaying us with all these cynicism and all the skepticism about what's going on. It's happening anyway. We're going there. Okay. Why don't we bring it forward? Just be having worry about the 3,000 people who very sadly are losing their jobs, but we'd have 6,000 new ones.
Ross Clark, aren't Tata simply doing a Margaret Thatcher on this one? She felt that the coal mines were no longer viable. She fought a lengthy battle against Arthur Scargill and the trade unions, of course, the mine workers, and she's been proved right. So isn't this just Thatcherite modernisation times, for the 21st century?
Well, to some extent, you could say, what's going to happen in Port Talbot isn't all that important to the UK economy, because already UK steel import has collapsed, and it's we're importing. I mean, an advanced industrial economy, you expect really the sort of mass production maybe to go abroad, and then Britain to concentrate on the more specialised steels, the higher value steels. That's a sort of logical way for the economy to go. But, going back to what Ed says, I am all for investing in new technologies and investing in green steel technology as well. But you can't just will these things into existence. You can't just say, we'll put, $1 billion here, $1 billion there into, developing a new demonstration plant. Because it's new technology, you don't really know whether it can really be commercialized or not. And in the meantime, we should certainly be holding on to our blast furnaces and primary steel production and, have a foot in both camps.
My thanks to Ed Gemmell and Ross Clark, proving to be quite the double act these days. Gentlemen, we'll catch up again soon. A fascinating conversation. Your reaction, please, mark@gbnews.com. Now, it's literally 29 minutes until I deal with Gary Lineker, who, let me tell you, is no victim. That's my take at 10. But next up, in a career spanning over 60 years, and one which, let me stress, is ongoing, former Tory MP Neil Hamilton is to step down as leader of UKIP. What are his hopes for the future of British conservatism? He's going to be dropping some truth bombs, and that's next. Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
to find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News is Britain's news channel, and now you can support it. All you have to do is scan that QR code that's up on your screen right now, or you can go to gbnews.com/support and become a GB News member. You'll have fantastic benefits. We're also going to organise special events where you as GB News members can meet the presenters, the on-screen faces. Scan the QR code or go to gbnews.com/support. Thank you so much.
OK, folks, listen, a very, very busy show. Gary Lineker, I'll be dealing with him at 10 o'clock in my Take at 10. He's done an interview with The Guardian, and I will give an unapologetic response. But emails are coming in thick and fast, so many that my laptop is virtually heating up. Per Talbot, Mark, can I ask the person in charge of the environmental lobby, will the net zero achieved lower impacts on Britain in the next 1,000 years? Of course not. Why doesn't he concentrate on what we can do to mitigate the impacts that are here to stay? Thank you for that. That's from Clifford. Folks, more of those emails to come. But first, in a career spanning 60 years, and one which, let me tell you, is ongoing, former Conservative MP and Minister Neil Hamilton is to step down as the leader of UKIP, the UK Independence Party. A new leader will be announced in the months ahead, and as the party chairman Ben Walker told me on this programme last week, the position of leader is open to all. All you have to do is sign up to be a member. So, what is the future for UKIP, the political brand which helped launch Brexit? And what are Neil's hopes for the future of British conservatism? So, Neil Hamilton, I can see that you mean business tonight because you're wearing your bow tie.
Yes, I thought I'd just give an optimistic note to this.
And it's not even one of those ready-made ones. You've done that yourself, haven't you? Just like James Bond. Can I ask you why you've stepped down? Because you're a figure of profile and repute in this country. It's a great loss to them. So why are you standing down?
Well, I'm not standing down. It's just my term of office comes to an end this year.
And you're not seeking re-election?
And it's a 4-year term. I'm 75 in March, would you believe? And although I know that by American standards is very youthful, nevertheless, there are other things I want to do with my remaining years.
You could get it up again for another 4 years.
And I'm not giving up UKIP, by the way. I'm still going to remain active in UKIP and in politics, but I've just got my practicing certificate back at the bar, and I want to do a bit of legal work as well as doing broadcasting and other things.
Well, listen, you're a fabulous broadcaster. We love having you on this programme, and you appear regularly on GB News and elsewhere. You're going back to the bar at the age of 75. That's highly impressive. Is that an unusual move in that profession?
Well, I suppose it is these days, but when I was younger, people did go on forever. And 75 is the new 50, really, isn't it? So I don't see why I shouldn't.
Did you have to sit exams or something like that?
No, because I was called to the bar 40 years ago, and I've used my legal qualifications in various ways throughout my life. But I want to do a bit of private practice now, so that's what I'm doing.
Well, congratulations to you. That's remarkable that you're going to do that. Are you going back to the bar because you need to make some money, or does Christine want you out of the house?
Well, I do have an expensive wife to maintain, as you imply. But no, I don't think Christine wants me out of the house because she likes to have me under her thumb all the time. But I think she's quite happy to see me use my brain, especially if it butters a few parsnips.
Well, congratulations on that move. It's very exciting. What is the future for UKIP? You're going to remain very much a committed figure within the party.
Yeah.
What is the future? Does it still matter? Is it still relevant?
It certainly does, because UKIP's manifesto is really a common sense manifesto, and we are, a grassroots political movement. The reason that we got Brexit, why we got the referendum to begin with, why we won the referendum, was because of UKIP, and it was a spontaneous uprising of people against the elite consensus, by which, once again, we are controlled. Because although we nominally left the EU in 2019, what has changed? Almost nothing. This useless Conservative government has done nothing to take advantage of the freedoms which we got as a result of fighting so hard for decades. They've squandered the opportunities. And so UKIP still has a vital role, I think, in relation to the European Union, getting rid of all the over-regulation which we suffer, cutting taxes, getting the state out of people's lives, off their backs, all the green nonsense which today we've seen the damage that it has done to our country and the deindustrialisation of Britain.
In your native Wales?
My native Wales. I remember 60 years ago travelling by train through Port Talbot. In those days, it was a huge steel-making city, and before the days of clean air, you had a thick yellow sulphurous fog which covered the town all the year round. I'm glad that side of it's gone, but I'm very distraught to see the destruction of heavy industry in South Wales, because there's nothing comparable to replace it, and all that's left is poverty and devastation. And we've had a Labour government in Wales for 20 years. It's a one-party state. They've done nothing for working people. That's why I want to keep going in politics with UKIP, because we do represent the ordinary person.
Now, the leadership of the Welsh government would argue that they've been fighting very hard for Welsh jobs and they're going to do what they can to support people in Port Talbot. And also they could counter by saying, well, this is what the Tories did to the coal mines in the 80s. Would you accept that point?
No, I think it's completely different. But actually, they are connected in a way, because the Tories are crazy eco-zealots, just as the Welsh Labour government is. They, between them, have been responsible for the deindustrialisation of Britain. Now, of course, we all understand that technological change means that you're going to change the structure of industry in the country, and the old smokestack industries are a thing of the past. But we could perfectly well have a coal industry and a steel industry which is efficient and commercially viable.
And we should be making our own steel if we're serious about making things.
We make our energy costs artificially high. We price ourselves out of jobs and price industry out of our country.
Two more things to ask you before you get yourself ready for my Gary Lineker monologue at 10. There was some drama on the show last night as your deputy leader, Rebecca Jane, resigned, and she shared her thoughts on this show. It seems the interview was not well received at Party HQ. Take a listen, Neil.
Disillusion with politics has never been lower. I started with such passion and optimism and eternal hope, and I leave with, well, none of that. I have been unfollowed on Twitter, removed from the WhatsApp groups, removed from the Facebook groups, and let's see how many blockings I've probably got from higher up.
There you go. If you didn't hear that, Rebecca Jane, former deputy party leader, dumped off social media channels by UKIP, the party that she was deputy leader of only hours previously. Now, Rebecca Jane's been on Twitter and she has said the following, Neil Hamilton. UKIP need to fold as a traditional political party, rebranding as an activist party, holding every lying politician to account. I have respect for what they achieved and I'm proud to have served. But in the words of Nigel Farage, the brand is broken and needs a new direction. Do parties of the right, Reform UK, UKIP stand a chance under our current electoral system? There you go. So she's not happy about that. So look, that is the tweet from Rebecca Jane. UKIP should stop being a party and be a pressure group. Has she got a point?
No, I don't think she does. You can't change anything in this country unless you achieve things through elections. UKIP has never actually had an MP elected, apart from Douglas Carswell and Mark Reckless, who were Tory defectors. But without that, nevertheless, we managed to force a Conservative government into having an EU referendum, and as a result of that, we left the EU. So, whilst obviously I want UKIP to be successful in the traditional sense of electing people to Parliament, I mean, I was elected to the Welsh Parliament as a UKIP member, then I do think that there is a role for what you might call the extra-parliamentary political activity as well. So I don't see that there's any kind of contradiction in what she's saying. You can be a traditional political party and be an activist party.
Was it a little harsh to unfollow her on social media channels, given that she's such a friend of the cause?
I mean, I don't do any of this social media stuff anyway. I'm far too old. You know, I write letters to people. But you've got
a quill.
So I think that you can be too sensitive about this sort of stuff.
And last but not least, I mustn't get in trouble with producer Greg, but I've got to ask you this. What is the difference between UKIP and Reform? Why don't you step aside and let Richard Tice build some momentum around a proper Conservative movement?
Well, Rebecca made approaches to Richard Tice, as you know. She did it on this channel some months ago to say, let's cooperate. She didn't even get a reply. The difference between Reform and UKIP is you can't actually join Reform because they have three members, Nigel Farage, Richard Tice and the party treasurer, because you need three members to register as a political party according to the Electoral Commission's rules. But you can't join it, so therefore you have no constitutional right to participate in making party policy or even voting for the leader. I mean, how is Richard Tice the leader of Reform? Nobody voted for him. He was anointed by Nigel Farage, who is the proprietor of this £100 company, which is the Reform UK party.
Okay.
He is a majority shareholder, so he controls everything.
Well, listen, I tell you what, if I wanted anybody to represent my legal interests, it would be Neil Hamilton. No one has your wit or intellect, but you'll be a loss to UKIP as their
You're
main
too
leader.
kind, sir.
But there you go, the brilliant Neil Hamilton, who's back at 10 to react to my take at 10, threatening attacks on the BBC's biggest star are a disgrace. But be clear, Gary Lineker is no victim. But next up, it's Mark Meets, and we'll be looking at 100 years since the first Labour government. Is another one coming? See you in 2. Oh!
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There'll be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests, and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'll be dealing with Gary Lineker in just 12 minutes' time in my take at 10. But first, Mark meets, and this week sees the 100-year anniversary of the first Labour government. So my Mark Meets guest is the author of a brand new book all about a century of Labour in Britain and that very first post-war Labour administration. David Torrance is the author of The Wild Men, the remarkable story of Britain's first Labour government. Now, I'm so excited about this conversation because isn't it cyclical, right? Very cyclical that you had a Labour government exactly 100 years ago this week, and we're about to have another one. Something I want to look at is how the Labour movement has changed. So, David, welcome to Mark Dolan tonight. Your book is a great historic tome. The year is 1923. The First World War ended 4 years previously. All men finally have the vote, and it delivered a surprise result.
Yes, but actually a very complicated result. And it's a bit difficult to get our heads around this from today's perspective. We think of parties winning elections and then forming a government. What happened then is that Stanley Baldwin, the Conservative leader, called an election expecting to increase his majority. He wanted to change his economic policy. In fact, he lost seats, Labour gained some, and the Liberal Party also recovered some of its losses the previous year. So you had a very rough three-way split in the House of Commons, but such was Constitutional Convention, such were political events, and the enmity between the Conservatives and Liberals at that point. The result was a Labour minority government.
Well, indeed. Now, of course, Labour had to transition from being a workers' movement to a political party. How did the establishment react to the arrival of this first Labour government?
Some of them were extremely unhappy about it. You have to remember that at this point, it's just a few years after the Russian Revolution in 1917, an incredibly violent revolution. And some conservatives, a lot of media, newspapers, they genuinely thought that a Labour government in the UK would go down the same path, that to some degree they were even being controlled by Moscow. They were taking their orders from communists there. Others, I think, realised that wasn't true, but sought to make political capital from playing on voters' fears that that might happen.
And what's fascinating about the story is that these were very accomplished men, but not experienced in the world of parliamentary politics or the machinery of government. As the book title suggests, they were the wild men. Tell me more.
So only a few Labour MPs had any experience of government from a coalition during the First World War. Ramsay MacDonald, the leader of the Labour Party and of the opposition from 1922, had no experience whatsoever. Quite unusual then, probably less so now, I think, given recent history. So there was a real fear in some quarters that if they weren't wild and extreme, they would simply be unfit to govern. They wouldn't know how to run the UK, its then vast empire. They would fail through inexperience. But actually, that didn't turn out to be the case. Ramsay MacDonald despaired on one level of what he had to work with. He didn't think his own backbenchers were very high quality. So he assembles a cabinet of Labour people, left and right, moderates and more radicals, ex-Liberals, and even a couple of Conservatives. The First Lord of the Admiralty, Lord Chelmsford, protests to everyone on joining the cabinet that he's been a Conservative all his life.
And of course, it was a tumultuous administration that ultimately fell, but I guess the legacy is that it was the first Labour government and the first of many.
Yeah, Ramsay MacDonald's whole strategy at the time was to demonstrate that they could be a party of government. And indeed, after the October 1924 election, which Labour lost, but they paradoxically gained 1 million votes, at that point, they displaced the Liberal Party as the main alternative centre-left progressive party. And so in that sense, Ramsay MacDonald's strategic aim of making Labour, proving that Labour were fit to govern, passed at that point. He forms another government, another minority in 1929, but from that point, he's Prime Minister until 1935.
Listen, only a few seconds to go. I would urge my viewers and listeners to grab a copy of the book because I've started reading it and it's very entertaining and it's fabulous history. But just bringing us up to 2024, Patrick Diamond, writing in the Labour-supporting newspaper Labour List, poses the question today, 100 years since Labour first came to power, we must ask why it so often loses. Why do you think Labour haven't been more successful in reaching high office than they have been?
I can't comment on more recent events, but I think in the 20s and 30s, and of course it's 1945 before Labour form a majority government, I think they still had something to prove. There was still a fear from some sections of the electorate that they wouldn't be responsible in government. There were often splits at that point in the broader Labour movement. Indeed, the left of the party was deeply unhappy with the first two governments. And all of that, I think, contributed to it taking a bit longer than perhaps it should have. For Clement Attlee
it is a cracking read, as I say. It's beautifully written. Let's have a look. Give me that screenshot of the book if you can. It's out now. It's by David Torrance. It's winning rave reviews. It's called The Wild Men, The Remarkable Story of Britain's First Labour Government. Thank you, David. OK, folks, back to me, Faye, and we've got a very busy hour to come. Next up, I'll be dealing with Gary Lineker, who, let me tell you, is no victim.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Good evening. Welcome to your latest GB News weather. I'm Ellie Glazier. Storm Isha will bring some very heavy rain and some strong winds across the UK overnight tonight and into Monday morning. It pushes its way north and eastwards across western parts of Scotland this evening, bringing some very heavy rain, particularly to those western parts of the UK. That rain will continue to push its way north and eastwards through the evening and overnight, and it's through the early hours of Monday morning that those winds really start to pick up. Gusts of 60 to 75 miles an hour across those western coasts, perhaps as high as 90 across parts of Scotland. It will be a very mild night as well, particularly compared to what we've seen recently, maybe 8 or 9 degrees across the southeast. A very windy start to the day on Monday, though. Those winds will ease a touch through the early hours of the morning, but still remaining very blustery across the UK into Monday afternoon. Showers quite widely pushing in from the west into Monday afternoon as well, perhaps turning wintry across the very high ground of Scotland. There will be some sunshine across the very far southeast. Temperatures here maybe 10 or 11 degrees, and elsewhere around the mid-single figures. Tuesday will start a little bit drier for some, particularly along eastern parts of England, but that doesn't last very long. This next system pushing in from the west as we go through Tuesday afternoon, bringing some further heavy rain, particularly to western parts of Scotland, northwest England and into Wales as well, and some strong winds associated with that. Something a little drier on Wednesday, but further wet and windy weather later in the week.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Have a great Saturday night with me, Leo Curse, on the Saturday Night Showdown. It's a crazy world out there, so come and make fun of it with me, my panel of comedians, and a couple of people who actually know what they're talking about. This Saturday Night Showdown is your front row ticket to the clown show every Saturday, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan, Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks, the admission's free.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa! Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Wake up to the headlines with headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Good evening, it's 10 o'clock on television, on radio and online in the United Kingdom and across the world. This is Mark Dolan Tonight. In my take at 10, threatening attacks on the BBC's biggest star are a disgrace. But be clear, Gary Lineker is no victim. In a major new headache for Rishi Sunak, the Sun on Sunday newspaper report that a handful of Tory MPs are in secret defection talks with Reform UK. I'll get reaction from one of Reform's most high-profile supporters, Anne Widdecombe. Plus, tomorrow's newspaper front pages and live reaction in the studio from my top pundits. A busy hour to come. Gary Lineker in just 2 minutes' time. But first, the news headlines and Tamsin Roberts.
Mark, thank you, and good evening from the GB newsroom. Here are the top stories this evening. Winds of up to 90 miles per hour have hit Wales this evening as Storm Isha sweeps across Britain. Forecasters have warned of danger to life in some areas and warned of falling trees, power cuts and possible flooding. The Met Office says a tornado could hit Northern Ireland, parts of Scotland and Northern England, and tornado watch zones have been issued. Sellafield nuclear site in Cumbria has also been closed. Network Rail has now suspended its services and ScotRail has cancelled its Monday morning rush hour services. Flights have also been disrupted with some cancellations. GB News Northern Ireland reporter Dougie Beattie has this update.
Storm Isha has most definitely made landfall in Northern Ireland. The small town of Portstewart is now being battered by very high winds. There has been power outages in County Down and fallen trees in Hollywood. This storm is only going to get worse as the night goes on.
Ron DeSantis has dropped out of the US presidential race and has endorsed Donald Trump. His surprise video announcement comes ahead of this week's New Hampshire Republican primary, where Mr DeSantis was polling in the single digits. His departure leaves Nikki Haley as Mr Trump's only significant rival. The Duchess of York has been diagnosed with skin cancer just months after being treated for breast cancer. The diagnosis comes after she had several moles removed, with one of those identified as being cancerous. A spokesperson for Sarah, Duchess of York, confirmed she's been diagnosed with malignant melanoma. She's said to be undergoing further investigations to ensure it's been caught early. The Duchess is said to be in good spirits, despite the fact another cancer diagnosis so soon after the last one has been what they described as distressing. Detectives investigating the deaths of 4 people in Norwich on Friday say 2 adults died of stab wounds. The man and woman, along with 2 young children, were found dead in a house in Cossey. Post-mortem examinations for the 2 girls will be carried out on Wednesday. Norfolk Police has referred itself to the independent watchdog after failing to respond to a 999 call from the home where the bodies were later found. Now, the skies above Berlin were lit up last night as a rare meteor was spotted. Researcher Michael I, who managed to capture the moment on camera, told reporters he was just about to take his dog for a walk when a colleague told him to keep his eyes on the sky. Experts say it's only the 8th time it's ever been possible to predict the exact time of a meteor. This is GB News across the UK on TV, in your car, on digital radio and on your smart speaker. Just say play GB News. Now it's back over to Mark.
My thanks to Tamsin Roberts, who returns in an hour's time. Welcome to a very busy Mark Dolan tonight. Lots to get through. In a major new headache for the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, the Sun on Sunday newspaper report that a handful of Tory MPs are in secret defection talks with Reform UK. I'll get reaction from one of Reform's most high-profile supporters, Anne Widdecombe. Plus, as calls grow for a ban on prayers in schools, is it time to keep religion out of the classroom? Plus, tomorrow's newspaper front pages and live reaction in the studio from tonight's top pundits, including author and broadcaster Lisa Mackenzie, Conservative peer and former advisor to Boris Johnson, Lord Ranger, and former Conservative minister and current leader of UKIP, Neil Hamilton. Plus, they'll be nominating their headline heroes and back page zeros of the day. A packed hour, and those papers are coming. But first, my take at 10. God knows I'd rather show you cat videos than talk about Gary Lineker. You know, cat videos like this one. Look at that little cutie. Whose dressing gown is that? Just adorable. Oh, it's time for breakfast. OK, that's probably enough, Greg. Unfortunately, I have no choice because Britain's officially nicest man, someone who gives Mother Teresa and the Dalai Lama a run for their money, is back in the news. In an interview with The Guardian, there's a surprise, the Match of the Day star spoke about being attacked for his political opinions. And whilst I absolutely abhor and condemn anything vicious or threatening that may have been said to old Gaz, and I've had my fair share as well, if you're going to put yourself out there with strong and at times divisive opinions, you must accept a little bit of pushback. But Saint Gary doesn't like that. In the last 24 hours, he has used his huge public platform to threaten someone with libel for daring to say that he received money from Qatar for his World Cup coverage. Qatar, of course, being a hateful regime which treats women like second-class citizens, backs the terror group Hamas and jails gay people. Now, top comedy writer Lee Kern, the man behind hit movies like the hilarious Borat, found himself in hot water with Lineker after criticising his double standards. Lineker shot back, tweeting the following. Lineker said, "I have temporarily unblocked you to let you know that your tweet is libelous. I didn't take a penny, a pound, a rial or anything else from Qatar for the World Cup. I work for the BBC and the BBC alone. I suggest you delete your inflammatory lies immediately." Well, this is a little confusing, isn't it? First of all, fronting the World Cup in Qatar for the BBC still isn't a great look, is it? For a man who wears his woke credentials on his sleeve. If he hates sexism, if he hates racism, if he hates homophobia, would he want to be in any way associated with this tyrannical regime and its twisted medieval values whilst broadcasting on the BBC? And did this famous eco-warrior, who is so concerned about global warming and is Greta Thunberg's #1 fan, did he not think twice about jumping on a plane to fly to the Middle East to present shows in air-conditioned stadia in the desert? Stadia, I hasten to add, built in part by modern-day slaves, thousands of whom fell to their death in their construction or perished in the crippling 40-degree heat. So the point about Lineker's double standards remain, but it gets worse. Because Lineker's rebuttal to this comedy writer, who is Jewish and is very upset by Lineker's reaction to the October the 7th attacks on Israel, is a tad misleading as well. Because whilst Kern was wrong to say that Lineker was paid by Qatar for covering the World Cup, it was the BBC who paid him, and more fool them, Lineker conveniently omits the fact that he has previously taken money from the Qatar regime. How much? Oh, just a reported £1.6 million over 4 years, broadcasting Champions League football for Al Jazeera, a television network owned by, you guessed it, the Qatari state. As well as criticising Lineker's position on Israel, the BBC star has had to delete a recent retweet which called for Israel to be banned from major sporting events. Lee Kern makes some other quite compelling points about Saint Gary. Take a listen. Lee Kern wrote, "Gary Lineker inhabits a world of zero risk, zero threat, zero danger. He's a multi-millionaire member of Britain's media class. In the game of identity politics, he is as immune from struggle as it's possible to be." The writer goes on, "Lineker lives where words are just a game to impress his smug, chattering-class media friends. For Lineker, it's simply a game of words, a peacocking vanity, a warm bath of righteousness that he slips into with zero consequences, always in his knight's armour, but never going into battle." Blimey, I couldn't have put it better myself. You can see why he's a top writer. The truth is, I've always thought that you judge a person by their actions, not their words. And Lineker's Mr. Nice Guy image doesn't stand up to scrutiny in my book. This is a guy who sells junk food to kids. Now, crisps are delicious, but they're not good for you, especially youngsters. He presumably would like the government to spend more money on public services, given that he's identifiably on the political left. And yet, he successfully battled HMRC in court to reduce his tax bill by over £4 million by clarifying that he was a contractor to the Beeb, not an employee. Just think how many school teachers or nurses that 4 million odd quid would pay for, or how much refugee accommodation that would provide. Whatever his worldview is, rest assured that Gary won't be impacted as he mocks his employers and continues to tweet from the luxury of his London mansion. He might have the money thanks to a hefty licence fee income, courtesy of you and me, £1.3 million. But the rest of Britain can't afford Gary's luxury opinions. Violent or vicious attacks on this former football ace are appalling and deeply wrong. But be clear, Gary Lineker is no victim. Now, back to those cat videos. Aren't they cute? I call that one Gary. Can I just tell you that producer Greg spent all afternoon editing those cat videos, and I think the show has suffered as a result. Well done, Lottie. Folks, listen, your reaction, please. mark@gbnews.com. I'll get to your emails shortly. Let's hear from my top pundits. Author and broadcaster Lisa Mackenzie, Conservative peer and former advisor to Boris Johnson, Lord Ranger, and former Conservative minister and current leader of UKIP, Neil Hamilton. Kulveer, let me start with you. It's important, isn't it, to take into account the fact that Gary Lineker has been quite consistent about his concern for environmental causes. He even admitted himself, he said, look, we're all hypocrites, but we've got to make a difference. He's doing his best to spark a debate. It's been reported that he actually cancelled his contract with Al Jazeera after 4 years when he realised about the human rights abuses and what was happening. And before he fronted the World Cup coverage on the BBC, he did a monologue condemning human rights abuses. So are you in a position, are you in a mood to defend Gary Lineker?
Well, look, you know, I'm always conflicted when I think about Gary Lineker. I recall those great World Cups of 86 and 90, his England heroics, and as a Tottenham fan, you know, he did some great things for us, helping us win the FA Cup in 91. But...
It's lucky for Spurs when the year ends in one, isn't it?
It is sometimes. It's been a long time. But with Gary Lineker now, as we all see, he's using his platform, his public sector platform, his taxpayer public licence fee paid platform, to talk about many other things. And I read this parts of this interview, and he says, well, I look at every single word very carefully, especially if there's some political context in the tweets that he puts out there. He generates debate via Twitter. Well, why not generate debate by actually getting involved in a debate? And what I think I'd like to see, you know, Gary Lineker is obviously a principled man. He has views and he has things that he wants to say about society. So I think the challenge now for Gary Lineker is, will he come onto the political stage, onto the political field? There's an election this year. He can get involved. He could either set up his own party, I'm sure he could talk to Neil Hamilton about a thing or two about those things, or he could join a major party. I think he'd add something to public debate. But that's having skin in the game. I think, you know, that's where you actually say, OK, I care about these things and I'm going to do something about it. So you could get off now from the sidelines and get on the political pitch.
Neil Hamilton, many would argue that Gary Lineker is an incredibly nice man. He's famously great to work with. He's generous. Of course, he's a football legend. This is a guy that's taken in refugees in his own home. This is a guy that walks the walk, and that's why he's got nearly 9 million followers on Twitter.
Well, I've no idea whether he's a nice person or not, but, I mean, poor little limousine liberal, you've got to feel sorry for him. He's been attacked on Twitter. Good heavens, how could he ever recover from that? I mean, the absurdity of him unblocking somebody in order to say, I'm going to sue you for libel. You know, this is playground politics for children, isn't it, really? The trouble with dimwits like Lineker is that they take a sort of high moral tone, but they don't live up to their own moral rules, as you rightly say. Don't you think the word
dimwit is harsh language and a bit unparliamentary from you, Neil?
Well, I'm no longer a member of Parliament, and
I hope you'd keep the spirit of parliamentary decorum.
GB News is the people's channel. I think I'm talking in the language of the people. You know, if Gary Lineker dishes it out, he should be able to take it. I couldn't care less what people say about me on social media. I have no idea, actually, what they say about me on social media, because I don't waste my time looking at it. But, you know, I have been in hot water myself in the course of my life. I was the government whip for Northern Ireland at the height height of the Troubles, I was on an IRA assassination list. That's the sort of thing you ought really to be worried about. But being called names on Twitter, is this really something that you ought to advertise to the world as something which has really cut you to the quick? I think it's absolutely pathetic.
Shocking to think you were being followed and targeted by the IRA. I could have just told them where you drink and it would have been game over. Listen,
We're
Lisa.
kissed and made up now, by the way.
Lisa, these attacks, aggressive, violent attacks on public figures, completely unacceptable. Death threats, all the rest of it. But that aside, Gary Lineker is no victim.
No, I mean, I think we're in the age of hypocrisy, to be honest. I think, we look back at different ages of politics, and I think the one that we're in right now is hypocrisy. And I do think the writer... I follow him.
Lineker, who is one of the writers of Borat.
I do follow him on Twitter, actually. I don't follow Gary Lineker, actually. But I do follow him on Twitter, and I thought that statement that he made... it might be something that I would say, actually, that it is OK to have, any kind of political, I suppose, debate if it's only on Twitter and from your mansion in London. I mean, that's great. But, Gary Lineker... his family, I don't know if you knew, but his family used to sell fruit and veg on Leicester Market. So, at some point in his life, he'd have known about fruit and veg and healthy food. The way that he rose to fame, which was through, ordinary people watching football, liking it the way that he was, I think he's at risk now of losing those people because, it is the age of the hypocrite. And unfortunately, he's not the only one on Twitter.
I've only got a couple of seconds, Lisa. Your hairdresser is with you tonight.
He is.
Drove down from Nottingham. What's he called?
His name's Wayne.
Wayne is the fountain of all wisdom. You often quote him. He watches the show, watches the channel. What does he think of Lineker, briefly, if you can?
What would Wayne think of Lineker? I think Wayne's not really a football fan, so he wouldn't really remember him. He might have fancied him back in the 80s.
Well, that would do. Well, who wouldn't? Even I fancied Gary Lineker. Listen, the bottom line is I've been very harsh about Gary Lineker. It is true that he's been consistent. He's never done a U-turn when it comes to his concerns about the environment, about human rights, about refugees. And, of course, he's entitled to his view. I think the big issue for him is that he's on the public payroll at the Beam. And I think if he came and worked at GBNews, he'd be as good as gold. In fact, I'd love to have him on the channel. What do you think, Gary? How's about it? Certainly love to have you as a guest on the programme. Mark meets Gary Lineker. Would you watch that? This is a call to arms. OK, folks, lots more to come in a major new headache for Rishi Sunak. The Express newspaper report that a handful of Tory MPs are in secret defection talks with Reform UK. I'll get reaction from Anne Widdecombe next.
I'm Christopher Hope.
And I'm Gloria Di Piero, bringing you
PMQ's Live here on GB News. Every Wednesday, we'll bring you live coverage of Prime Minister's questions when Rishi Sunak and Sir Keir Starmer go head-to-head in the House of Commons.
We'll be asking our viewers and listeners to submit the questions that they would like to put to the Prime Minister, and we'll put that to our panel of top politicians in our Westminster studio.
That's PMQ's Live here on GB News, Britain's election channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News.
Britain's news channel.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan, Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks, the admission's free.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Papers on the way, but in a major new headache for Rishi Sunak, the Sun on Sun newspaper report that a handful of Tory MPs are in secret defection talks with Reform UK. Reform's leader, Richard Tice, star of GB News, of course, told the paper there is increasing desperation in the Red Wall. Some Red Wall Tories have been scoping us out about defecting through third parties. He goes on to say there is more than one Tory MP involved. A source close to Reform UK also predicts that if Nigel Farage re-enters party politics to campaign for the former Brexit party, then, quote, that trickle of Tory MPs talking about defecting could become a stream. Let's get the views now of tonight's newsmaker, former government minister, author and television personality Anne Widdecombe. Anne, you effectively defected a few years ago, having left the Tories to join Reform. Do you think one or two Conservative MPs will ultimately follow?
Well, let me just say I'm not privy to any of these conversations that are going on, so if you're hoping for me to name names, I can't. But what makes complete sense is that if you're, for example, a Red Wall Tory, you're not going to win on what the Tories are doing at the moment, whereas the Reform Party, which is, of course, evolved from the Brexit Party, actually does campaign for the sorts of things that those constituents are interested in, and also campaigns for things like common sense and proportionality, which used to be the watchwords of the Conservative movement and no longer are. So it would make a lot of sense for some of those MPs who are not going to hold their seats if they stand under the banner of Rishi Sunak to come where they might very well keep the seat.
And do you feel that Tory MPs are duty-bound to change party in order to stand up for their principles? For example, if you were still a sitting Conservative MP right now, would you be considering your position?
I might be considering my position, but I would not like to say, with my hand on the good book, that I would absolutely and definitely change, because I might well not. What sitting MPs have to consider are a lot of things. There's the loyalty between them and their party workers, sometimes built up over a large number of years, and they feel they could let those down. There is their loyalty to their colleagues who feel let down. There is all manner of pressure on you when you're an MP. But all I will say is that MPs do change parties. They cross the floor of the House of Commons. Churchill crossed it twice. They cross the floor of the House of Commons. They join other parties. Therefore, there is no reason on earth why MPs who have Reform's values shouldn't join Reform. But I would just explain, that there is a lot of pressure on you.
Now, Anne, as Britain's strictest head teacher, Catherine Birbalsingh, battles in court to ban prayers at school, is it time to keep religion out of the classroom?
Absolutely not. I cannot understand at the moment. Christianity has been virtually squeezed out, There's no longer an act of worship at an awful lot of school assemblies, unless they're religious schools. Children aren't taught scripture anymore. Then they're expected to understand things like Shakespeare and Milton without a clue about the biblical references. They're expected to be taught appreciation of art without a clue what the Renaissance portraits are actually showing because they don't know the stories behind it. They're supposed to study medieval history without knowing anything about the church. Now, even if you are the most profound atheist, our country is Christian by heritage and culture. And I think it would be quite wrong to ban prayer, to ban acts of religious worship from schools.
Finally, Anne, a leading British cellist who performed at the nuptials of the Duke and Duchess of Sussex has said that Rule Britannia should be axed from last night of the Proms. Your reaction?
Absolutely stupid. We've had this postulated before. It never finds favour with the public. It is part of the Proms that the soprano sings Rule Britannia right at the end, and everybody joins in and loves it. Land of hope and glory. People are enjoying themselves doing that, and I see no reason why they shouldn't. No, I don't want to ban Rule Britannia, and in fact, there are places now at sea where we're trying to preserve the rights of shipping to move freely, where you might well say Rule Britannia.
Brilliantly put, Anne. What a treat to have you back on the show. I'm looking forward to Sunday already. My thanks to the television personality, former government minister and best-selling author Anne Widdecombe. Thank you, Anne. Look fabulous tonight, by the way. I'm going to put my sunglasses on next time. What a great debate. Your reaction, Mark, at gbnews.com. Folks, such a busy half hour to come. Some brilliant front pages with full pundit reaction. That's next. Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox,
That's right, we want to hear from you,
GB News.
Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News is Britain's news channel, and now you can support it. All you have to do is scan that QR code that's up on your screen right now, or you can go to gbnews.com/support and become a GB News member. You'll have fantastic benefits. We're also going to organise special events where you as GB News members can meet the presenters, the on-screen faces. Scan the QR code or go to gbnews.com/support. Thank you so much.
It's coming up to 10:30. Lovely to have your company. It's time now for tomorrow's front pages. OK, Faye, where should we start? Let's have the Daily Telegraph. BBC faces tougher scrutiny over bias. The broadcasting watchdog Ofcom to police web and social media as Minister raises viewers' impartiality fears. Boarding schools that let trans pupils pick their dormitories. Boarding schools are allowing trans pupils to stay in dorms of their preferred gender, according to an exclusive story in the Telegraph. Co-educational schools, including Taunton School in Somerset and Bedales in Hampshire, have told pupils that transgender pupils could be allowed to stay in accommodation according to their chosen genders. We'll come to that very shortly because, I know, Neil Hamilton knows what teenage boys are like, and this spells trouble. Storm Isha to bring a day of rail chaos and tornadoes. We're going to talk about that terrible wind as well. People have been told not to sleep next to a window tonight. OK, how about this? Nick Timothy writing in the Telegraph. Multiculturalism is becoming a Trojan horse for Islamist domination. Independent. How broken NHS mental health care is failing children. And Storm Isha roars in as whole of UK put under rare Met Office alert. The Mail, another royal health bombshell. Fergie, I have skin cancer. Days after the shock news from Charles and Kate and months after her mastectomy, Sarah Ferguson reveals that she has an aggressive form of the disease. Also, worst heart care crisis in memory. Soaring early deaths blamed on NHS waiting lists and obesity. The Eye, water bosses behind toxic sewage will be put in the dock under Labour. Daily Express, Sarah Ferguson in good spirits after shock new cancer diagnosis. The Sun, exclusive, royal shock. Fergie's new cancer battle. Duchess hit for a second time in 6 months. Whole country under weather alert, says the Metro next. Let's have a look at their front page. And you can see shocking scenes at Lyme Regis there. Walkers taking photos amid remarkable stormy weather and high seas. Also, vicious storms batter Britain. Daily Mirror, Star's plea to young people. Harry Kane, it's OK to ask for help. Daily Star, TV legend Brian Blessed. I wrestled a 48-stone gorilla. Well, could you tell the difference? And those are your front pages. Let's get full pundit reaction now from my brilliant guests, my big stars tonight, with ringside action, dropping a few truth bombs along the way. Author and broadcaster Lisa Mackenzie, Conservative peer and former advisor to Boris Johnson, Lord Ranger, and former Conservative government minister and current leader of UKIP, Neil Hamilton. Folks, lots of stories to get through, but very sad news, Lisa, regarding Sarah Ferguson. Of course, she is the Duchess of York. She was married to Prince Andrew. She had to put up with him for years. They cohabit, don't they, in Royal Lodge in Windsor.
Apparently they do.
Very, very sad news. She had breast cancer. She's had a mastectomy, and now she's got aggressive skin cancer.
It is sad that when anyone gets ill, it's very sad. I'm going to be completely honest. I don't know why she's on the front page of every single newspaper tomorrow. I feel very sorry for her, and it's very sad, but I think we've just got bigger and more serious things to talk about. I always find that every time that, you know, they always kind of throw a royal in to sort of distract us. And yes, it's sad, but I'm going to be quite honest. You know, this week, some terrible things have happened in the country. A baby being found in a plastic bag, a 2-year-old being found starved to death, the grooming gangs. I'd rather talk about them.
Well, and you're absolutely entitled to that view. And in fact, if we talk about ordinary Brits as well as, like you say, we wish Sarah Ferguson a speedy recovery, but there are millions of people on an NHS waiting list, almost 8 million at the moment, and it seems to be a big problem for heart care, Kulvia. The NHS is suffering its worst heart care crisis in living memory. Early deaths from heart disease have hit their highest level in more than a decade. Cases of heart attacks, heart failure and strokes are among the under 75s have tumbled since the 60s, and now they're back up.
No, we've got a big conversation to have in this country about health. You know, we tend to focus on the NHS as the institution to take care of us, or are we taking care of it, depending on what the government's telling us at any given moment. But obesity, our healthcare, our preventative measures and our actually treatment, how we handle these things. I think we have to re-envisage the way we are going to look at healthcare going forward, especially, and I'd say this, as new ways are coming in, new technology, new ways of being better prepared for the outcomes. And we're going to live longer. We're going to suffer from more of these things in different ways. So we can keep seeing these facts probably getting worse and worse and worse until we start having those big conversations. Will we have those big conversations this year when there's an election? Will the political parties be brave enough to start putting some of those things on the table? I think some of them might. I actually do have an inclination from all sides of the political spectrum that people are realising that we can't just keep doing things in the NHS as we've been doing it, because it's not working.
Most definitely, and that's a grown-up conversation that neither of the two main parties are having, Neil.
Absolutely right. We can't have a proper discussion about health in this country because it's a new form of religion. Really, it's replaced Christianity. And the National Health Service, the angels, they have angels in the health service, unlike anywhere else in the country. This is rather pathetic, really, because the Sovietised model that we've got for health provision in this country is just wholly unsustainable. We're not going to be able to fund the growing needs and the growing expenses of new treatments out of taxpayer funding, with no connection between the patient on the one hand who needs to be treated and the means of paying for the treatment which they've got to get. 38 years ago, I was a member of a group of MPs who produced a reform plan for the health service called the NHS A Suitable Case for Treatment. And we did make some changes which were useful, which Tony Blair actually built upon in his first term of office. But, I mean, the system itself is so monolithic and incapable of being controlled by market mechanisms, which is really what we need to introduce here, which every other country in Europe does except Britain. Ireland has its own model which doesn't rely entirely upon taxpayer funding, and yet the debate is normally presented in terms of it's got to be an insurance-based model like in parts of the United States. Well, actually, the United States has a much more complicated system of health provision depending on what your income levels are and so on, than is normally talked about in the kind of Mickey Mouse debate that we have.
So you don't think America is the model, and you don't think out-and-out privatisation is the answer necessarily?
No, I think that there's got to be a combination of finance. I think people do have to accept more and more responsibility for the cost, which they're doing, because otherwise you're waiting years for operations that you need. If it's an orthopaedic operation, then you could be in pain with a knee operation or a hip for years, and who wants to go through that? If you've got the money, and people spend 10,000 quid on a cruise, you could spend the money on getting a new knee.
Well, definitely, and here's the problem, Lisa. I do think that the NHS risks becoming like the BBC, where everyone's got to pay for it, but not everyone uses it.
Yes, I mean, the evidence is that now people, even people that I know, if they can afford things, they are trying to go private, which I find very sad.
Borrowing money, using life savings.
They are. And when we were saying people are living longer, there are parts of the country where life expectancy is actually going down. So some people are living longer, but I think what we might start seeing in the future, if we don't start sorting out healthcare, housing, cost of living, poverty, the big issues, is that life expectancy will go down.
Do we need, though, to take a bit more responsibility for our own health? I remember in the 80s, my dad ran a pub. One of the customers was a very heavy drinker, and he needed a new liver. And his GP said, "You are not getting a new liver until you stop drinking." He said, "I want you to be sober for 6 months, and you get your liver. Otherwise, it ain't happening." I don't know whether we have that much tough love in the NHS anymore.
No, I think it's tough in the NHS. I think that we need to take more responsibility, yes, but I also think that there are other responsibilities in the food corporations, how much sugar they pile it into food.
I think that's
there's two things here.
Now, listen, I mentioned the BBC, Kulveer. Is it biased or is it not? Well, the Telegraph say the BBC faces tougher scrutiny over its impartiality. BBC audiences think the corporation is not sufficiently impartial, the Culture Secretary is going to say tomorrow, as she announces tougher scrutiny of the broadcaster to deal with perceived bias. Lucy Fraser will announce that the Beeb's website and social media channels will be policed by Ofcom in an attempt to ensure some kind of balance. Is the BBC biased?
Well, surely that should already be happening.
And I think that's
it's
the
in
big
the BBC's
question.
charter, isn't it?
Yes, and also the BBC now has Verify, and I wonder if it applies Verify to itself. But look, we all, you know, see different things on the BBC, and sometimes we can read too much into the BBC, but there is a case sometimes that you feel the editorial could be leaning anti-government, shall we say. Now, it can be whichever government's in power, because sometimes the BBC can just be not happy with whichever government is in power. So I think you've got to take all those things on board. But we do have to address it. Sometimes it does feel that the BBC has a sense of it leans to a bit more to the centre-left than it does potentially to the right. Maybe that's just a reaction. Maybe that's the Gary Linekers of the world that are at the BBC.
The left wing wouldn't say that, though, because they think the BBC is right wing.
Yeah. So I think you can cut both ways.
There was a Conservative supporting chairman at the top of the BBC until a few months ago. I mean, do you think the BBC is impartial?
I don't think anybody can be impartial. I'm not somebody who thinks that we don't take all our life experiences with us. We do. But I think with the BBC, one thing I have noticed about the BBC, they're becoming more disconnected, actually, from parts of the country. I have been watching ITV more recently, and they've been providing some very good documentaries and some really good political films. That was usually what the BBC do. So I think the BBC are becoming more elite.
Do you feel that the BBC no longer represents ordinary Brits? Then is that your concern?
I do. Yeah, I remember as a kid. When I in the 70s growing up, the BBC was for posh people and ITV was for us. And then that kind of switched a bit, and over the years it's changed. But I do think it's becoming more disconnected, actually.
I mean, the Beeb would argue that they get letters of complaint from people saying it's too right-wing and others saying it's too left-wing, which is perhaps proof they're doing it right, Neil.
Well, I don't think it's possible to decide this issue just by the number of letters or emails that you get. The truth is that the broadcast media class generally is metropolitan-oriented, liberal, lefty mindset. And it's not just the BBC. The difference is the BBC is funded by a TV tax that we all have to pay if we...
Do you pay it, Neil?
We do pay the TV tax because we're law-abiding citizens. But I can't listen to things like the Today programme any longer, I'm afraid. It annoys me so much that you do not get balance. We've had some interesting discussions today on GBNews on climate change related to the steel industry in Port Talbot. You never get what we might call our side of the argument, those who are sceptical of these theories of man-made global warming on the BBC. For them, it is an explicit article of religion. They say the science is settled, there can be no argument about it, therefore you won't hear any. And that seems to me to be completely wrong. Overwhelmingly, BBC presenters and contributors were anti-Brexit, for example, and it was quite clear from the subliminal bias which existed in the coverage of Brexit on the BBC, and not just the BBC, I'm not singling them out, all the other major channels were equally guilty.
Well, what's egregious about the Beeb is that we've got to pay for it.
Exactly.
That's why it's extra duty-bound to be in.
Can we just not throw the baby out in the bathwater on this? Because let's remember that the BBC do some great regional programmes. And one of the great things about the BBC is in most parts of the country they've got their own news that happens. And I think
local radio.
Yeah, local radio.
Many people say they would pay the licence fee for BBC Radio alone.
Yeah,
and World Service, BBC World Service. And I think, the BBC faces a triple challenge. It faces a challenge commercially of how does it look to fund itself going forward when it's being tackled by other platforms, other channels and everything else. Exactly. How does it keep its editorial balance, especially as we'll see an election year coming up, it's going to be under more scrutiny than ever. And as an organisation, it probably needs to reform as well. So there's I know that the Director General there understands these challenges. It's just how do you, much like the NHS, do it to such a vested organisation.
And this is what I think has been forgotten. I think what you said was absolutely right. There is a role for public service broadcasting, but the BBC is a vast monolithic institution that spreads its tentacles over all sorts of areas, and news broadcasting and cultural things and regional broadcasting, the things that can't survive in a commercial world and are worth supporting. I think there is a debate to be had about that on the one hand. What is the argument for having something like Radio 1 supported by a tax on listeners who might never switch it on, for example? So I think that the BBC needs to be slimmed down in that respect and needs to be made more commercial over large parts of its output.
OK, folks, let me tell you that I think the BBC could run a little tighter in its budget and be a bit more efficient, but it does do a brilliant job. Lots of great TV and radio programmes and some of my favourite presenters, including the likes of Hugh Edwards. Now, coming up... where is he, by the way? Is he on holiday?
Now you see him, now you don't.
OK, listen, folks, before I get myself in any trouble, is he on a sabbatical? Can I ask you, folks, do you want to hear what's in tomorrow's Times? Well, I've got the front page coming up, and it's a cracking story in there. A massive development in the US presidential elections, and my God, Trump looks to be on the march. We'll find out what that might mean for Britain. Plus, let me tell you, my pundits will nominate their headline heroes and back page zeros of the day. And we conducted a poll today. We've been asking, is net zero to blame for the Port Talbot Steelworks closures? The results are in. I shall reveal all next.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There'll be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests, and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now, today we conducted an exclusive Mark Dolan Tonight People's Poll. We've been asking, is net zero to blame for the Port Talbot Steelworks closures? The results are in, and 83.3% say yes, whilst 16.7% say no. OK, let's have a look at tomorrow's Guardian now. Surge in modern slavery in social care sector since visa rules eased, something that my pundit, Lisa McKenzie, is very concerned about. Modern slavery is surging in social care since ministers relaxed immigration rules to fill thousands of vacancies, with a growing wave of exploitation leading to workers being ripped off or living in squalor. It's a tragedy for those being exploited, a tragedy for those being cared for as well, because I can't imagine they're being cared for well. How about And one other story, actually, before we go, and it is a massive sorry, Faye. We'll just stay on The Guardian for a second. A sentence I'd never said before. Ron DeSantis drops out. US presidential hopeful quits the race and backs Trump. That's in The Guardian. Let's have a quick look at The Times as well. That same story in The Times. DeSantis quits Republican race, and Starmer defends national trust against Tory claims of wokery, and crisis for parents over free childcare. Problems with IT staff and funding means that parents that want to go to work, have their kids looked after, are not able to. OK, let's get reaction from Lisa McKenzie, Lord Ranger and Neil Hamilton, and Donald Trump. This is not a drill, Culvia Ranger. It appears he's certainly going to win the nomination to be the Republican candidate. Does he go all the way?
It feels like the candidacy feels like an inevitability now, obviously, with DeSantis. And obviously after the result last week, where he just trounced the field, didn't he? He was just head and shoulders above them all. And then the challenge here, though, when they've put the polling against Biden versus Trump, it's been quite close. Actually, the other candidates have been polling better against Joe Biden. So if we're talking about what will happen in November in the US, it could be a very close presidential election if it's Trump as a Republican candidate.
Very briefly, Neil, because I need to get to your nominations for Headline Heroes and Back Page Zeros, but I'm sure that you instinctively support Donald Trump, but he's not a very authentic conservative, is he?
No, he's not a conservative at all. You know, he's a highly radical individual and a populist in the true sense that he represents the views and instincts of ordinary people who are ignored by the establishment politics in America, just as they have been in this country. Of course, he's not everybody's cup of tea. You wouldn't necessarily want him as a house guest for a weekend. But if you ask, what was his presidency like, I think it was one of the more successful presidencies in modern times, actually. The Abraham Accords in the Middle East were negotiated by him. He negotiated with Kim Jong-un in North Korea. He managed, through his huge tax cuts, to kickstart the American economy and recreate industries that were in long-term decline, like coal and steel and so on in America. So I think the caricature that we hear about Trump in this country and the way he's portrayed in the media is at variance with the way millions and millions of Americans see him. And I think that he has a very good chance not just of winning the nomination, that's a done deal. He was a one-horse race from the start, but also actually winning. If Biden is the candidate, then what a choice. And if you ask me which is the better for Britain, I say unhesitatingly Trump, because Biden is a bitter enemy of this country and in so many ways. And Trump is half British himself. And I think that he has a very great affection for this country.
OK, well, listen, a fascinating guy who always makes the headlines. Let's make some of our own now with your nominations for Headline Hero and Back Page Zero. And briefly, if you can, Lisa, who's your hero today?
It's Maggie Neal, who has been fighting for 20 years around child exploitation, particularly in Rochdale. And finally this week, I'm not sure she's been heard, but the story is definitely out.
Maggie Oliver, a true heroine. What a great nomination. Briefly, if you can, Culvia, your headline hero.
Well, it is our King Charles III, because actually, unusually announcing why he was having medical treatment, having his prostate checked and dealt with because of the enlargement, but highlighting the fact of prostate cancer in men in this country. 53,000 cases a year, the highest level of cancer cases in men, 140 cases a day. Anything that shines light on us looking after ourselves a bit better when it's such a prevalent issue in society. So well done to the King.
Long live the King. And Maggie Oliver is Neil's nomination as well, and a resoundingly excellent option there. The clock's against us, so let's go to our Back Page Zeros, if we can.
Just Andy Burnham for the similar reasons, really. He's
Mayor of Greater Manchester.
Yeah, he's known about the Rochdale scandal for many, many years, and I'm sick of seeing politicians having to do things when they're only forced.
Yeah, well done.
OK. What about you, Culvia, your Back Page Zero?
Yeah, a gentleman called Chris O'Shea, who this week on BBC TV announced that his £4.5 million salary can't be justified. He's the head of Centrica, who own British Gas. And this is at the same time that Which have highlighted British Gas as the worst supplier in the country. So something not quite right there, because actually the majority of that salary was a bonus.
There you go. Imagine that. Listen, a couple of seconds, Neil, just in a word or two. You're back page zero.
Well, I've got Sheku Kenny Mason and for his deplorable ignorance of British history.
Ooh, Britannia.
And displaying it in glorious technicolor to us.
Listen, can I thank my fabulous pundits tonight? Really enjoyed your company. Thank you to the team the other side of the glass, Ben, Lottie, Greg and Faye. I'll see you Friday at 8. Headliners is next. Go and have a great week, and thanks for your company.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Good evening. Welcome to your latest GB News weather. I'm Ellie Glazier. Storm Isha will bring some very heavy rain and some strong winds across the UK overnight tonight and into Monday morning. It pushes its way north and eastwards across western parts of Scotland.